Are you a maker, a low code developer, a builder, and do you want to increase your productivity by a factor of 10 in the Power Platform in when you're building Canvas apps, model driven apps, Power Automate flows, Power Pages? Well, I'm going to show you a new set of tools that's going to make your productivity just soar. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be different than what you're used to, but if you've already been building apps, you should be able to figure this out. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code, and this is going to be the hub of all of our activity. Now, some of you might be thinking, Visual Studio Code, that's a developer tool. I'm not a pro developer. I'm just a maker. Okay, stop it right there. If you're building applications, you're just as much as a developer as anybody. And we're going to be able to use the best form of low code. That's natural language. And really, all throughout the years, that's all developers have been trying to do, trying to use natural language to build computer code to build applications, whether it be apps, agents, websites, automations, reporting, whatever. So we're going to need to install a few things. Now, of course, you're going to need a Power Platform tenant to connect to build an environment, to build your solutions. This part hasn't changed. But the few things you're going to want to do. First thing you're going to want to also do is get a Claude Code subscription or a subscription to GitHub Copilot. Or if you're really adventurous, you can use ChatGPT and get access to Codex. All right, you can get a subscription to Claude Code. You could start with the freebie version, but you're probably going to run out of capacity and credits very quickly. I am on the max plan because I use Claude Code and Claude every day for a lot of things, so I need that capacity. But you might want to just start with the pro plan and kind of work your way from there if you're going to use Claude Code. Now, regardless if you're going to use Claude Code, Codex, or GitHub Copilot, you still want to get a GitHub account. Now, if you're going to use GitHub Copilot, again, you probably want to get on some level of subscription to use some of the tokens, some of the capacity. But even if you're not going to use GitHub Copilot and you're going to stick with Claude or Codex, you still want to get a GitHub account because this is going to be your source control. So when you're building apps and agents and things, you're going to want to save your progress in a place where it's safe, where you can track history. GitHub is a good place for that. You can also use Azure DevOps, but at very least, I would sign up for a GitHub account. It should be free, and you can go in and we're going to use this in other videos down the road. Now, this is the big one you're going to want to download is Visual Studio Code. Now, it is really at the end of the day, some of you may think of it as a developer tool, but really it is a text editor. It is a harness or a framework to hold some of these other extensions that we can use for our agentic development. It is kind of the hub of all where our activity will be. You may think of this as a developer tool, but really at the end of the day, it is a maker tool, and it is where we're going to be doing the bulk of our work. Pretty powerful. You can download this for free from Microsoft. It's going to download on Windows. You can run it on a Mac, and I believe on a Linux system as well. So definitely this is going to be the core of what we're doing today. So make sure you get that and install it. All right, once you have Visual Studio Code downloaded, you have your account set up. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to fire up Visual Studio Code. You're going to see a welcome screen. You probably might see an update screen. They do regular updates to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing we're going to want to do is actually create a folder where we're going to store our projects. So I'm just going to click on the open folder. All right, so I've gone through, I've created a brand new folder. I've created a folder for all my development. I've also created a project folder. In this example, I'm just calling it Expense App because this is the app that we're going to be building using these tools. So once we've selected our folder, we've opened that. So that is really going to be essentially our workspace in Visual Studio Code. We don't need to worry too much about it at this point, but I do want to make sure you have your specific folder. All right, now that we have that done, a couple things we're going to want to install in Visual Studio Code. If you look to the side, you will see a whole bunch of different icons. Mine has a few other things installed already. What you're going to want to do is click on the extensions. And there's a few extensions that you're going to want to install at a bare minimum. First one is the Power Platform tools. So the Power Platform tools are going to install a bunch of command line utilities plus a whole bunch of other things. We're only going to use a small subset of these today, but effectively this is probably the quickest way to get these things installed. Get this on Visual Studio Code, and we're going to be using this quite a bit. So when we get into the command line, the pat commands that either us ourselves or our agents will use, this is where that's coming from. Now, you can install those pat commands separately outside of Visual Studio Code, but if you're just beginning, this is probably the best place to start. Now we're going to need an agentic tools to do some of these some fantastic things using AI. I like using Claude Code, so I'm going to use Claude Code for VS Code. Now you can also use GitHub or Codex, but you can also install this as an extension within Visual Studio Code. Another extension you might want to install is the GitHub Copilot chat. This is specifically if you're using GitHub Copilot. You might want to install it anyways, so you can have multiple of these agents installed where you can have them check each other's work, that kind of thing. So we have this installed as well. So we basically have our extensions installed. All right, so now that we have here, I want to point out a couple things. There are usually two versions of our agentic tools. First off, we have a side panel. So if we click on the little chat window here I have GitHub Copilot chat. I also have Claude Code. I have Codex here as well. And this way we can actually chat, and it's going to take a look at what we're working with. With these tools as well, we can have it actually go ahead, create other code, that kind of thing. I'm not going to get too deep into those in this particular video. We will explore these in the future, specifically when we're actually editing existing code. I find these very helpful. But what we're going to do instead is going to run these from the terminal, which is going to kind of open up a whole new world, and we're going to interact with it that way. So I'm just going to close the side panel here. And now we're going to launch the terminal. So we're just going to basically launch a brand new terminal. So you're going to find that it's going to open up in your directory. Now, if you're new to command lines, don't be too startled by this. We're basically going to be typing in these commands and navigating the folder structure and that kind of thing. So the first thing we can do, if we're using GitHub Copilot, we could just type Copilot, but I am using Claude. So I am going to type in Claude. And the first thing it's going to ask, is it going to trust this folder? Yes, we're going to trust this folder. This is where we're going to be doing all of our work. All right, so we're going to see the Claude terminal open up here. We can expand this. And this is where we're going to be doing most of our work today. Now, again, don't be too frightened about the Claude terminal. We're going to be typing in our commands very much if you're prompting anything else, whether you use ChatGPT or Copilot. Basically, we're going to be prompting here. Now, before we do that, we're going to want to install a couple plugins that are going to make our work talking to Power Platform so much more easier. So first thing we're going to do is install some plugins. Now, where do we get these? If we go to GitHub, and what we're going to install today is the Dataverse skills from Microsoft. So how do we do that? Well, basically in the GitHub, we will actually see there are commands for installing. So basically we have both for GitHub Copilot and Claude Code. Again, today we are doing Claude Code. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to go back into the terminal window and install that. All right, so I've typed in plugin install Dataverse Cloud plugins official. Now I've already installed it, so it probably should tell me it's already been installed, but if not, it will install those. It basically is saying it's already installed. So I use plugin to manage existing plugins. All right, so they've already been installed. So we actually just can go and type in plugins here. I typed in plugins. I'm looking at the installed. I'm actually seeing what do we have installed. We have the Dataverse plugin installed. That's the one I am looking at right now. That's the one we're going to be using today. So that's great. That's been enabled. It has skills. So if we were to type in a list of our skills, we do have a list of our Dataverse skills installed from that particular plugin. That's great. So now we can actually begin to start working with this. So we're going to escape to close out of this. And now what we want to do is begin to work. And I'm going to say, I want to connect. I want to create a new Dataverse environment. And we see here that it's already talking to us. It's going to tell us it's helping us create a new Dataverse environment. It's loading the Dataverse overview skill. And it's going to start running the pack commands, the Power Platform tools. And it's also going to ask me about if I want to have approval to run these. As you're beginning to use these tools, you probably want to see what's going on just to learn what the agents are doing. But eventually you can get these to run more in an automatic mode. So it's interesting. I've already connected to a series of different tenants. It's asking me which admin tenant should I want my environment created on. I have multiple. I can go through here. I'm going to choose my first one, and then it's going to ask me the type of environment that I want to create. Now, it should be worth noting that I could have specified that create me a new sandbox environment, create me a new developer environment, create me a trial, that kind of thing. We could have specified that, but because we didn't, that's why it's asking us. And of course, again, the region, same thing. We could have prompted it to do it, but again, it's going to be asking us. So I'm going to choose Canada. Once we've reviewed, we can submit our answers. And now Claude will go through for that particular tenant and then create it. So it's actually also given me some options for the name. So it is going to be our development environment. So I'm going to choose expense app dev. Again, I'm going to pick my currency. Let's just choose Canadian dollar and we'll submit those answers. And now Claude is going to go through and create that environment for me. So far, you might have done this before in the Power Platform Admin Center, but now we're turning it over to Claude, to the agent, to do this for us. Now, the other thing I want to point out as well, if we're not connected with an auth profile, and we'll talk a little bit about auth profiles in a moment, it would have prompted me as well. Would have prompted me to connect to a particular environment. We probably would have seen the Windows screen pop up. In this case, I was already connected with some auth profiles, and I will show you those in a few minutes. But basically, just be aware of that process. But overall, we're going through a very methodical process, and I really just started with one prompt, and it's going through step by step creating this. Again, might need some approval. So after a few minutes, we see that our environment got created. It created the name, the sandbox. We see all the information here. We see the environment ID, the organization, and the tenant ID. So all the things that we would expect that we would get when creating a new tenant. Now, again, we're maybe not saving as much time as if we went through the Maker portal, but we are still living completely within the context of Visual Studio Code within the Claude terminal. So everything is in one spot, and we're kind of going through these steps. And of course, we can begin to automate this, get our agents to do these things. So eventually, this could really help with our ALM processes as well. Now, it's given us some suggestions of what it can do about an auth profile. We definitely want that, and to create a workspace as well. So I'm just going to say go ahead and create the auth profile and then also connect it to a workspace. All right, so I put in the prompt, create the auth profile and connect the workspace. We are going to set up the data model in a minute, but before we do that, we're going to want to do these things. So as this is going through, what an auth profile is those credentials that connect your particular user. It connects Visual Studio Code to your Power Platform environment. So you're going to need this for a lot of things. Now, notice it is popping up probably with my credentials here, but this way it is going to wire it in. So I'm just going to choose my credentials here. I'm already signed in on this computer, so I probably don't need to use the Authenticator or anything like that. If you're using one of the other clients' environments, something like that, you might have to do this. Basically, so that auth profile is the link between Visual Studio Code and the Power Platform. The other thing it's going to do about the environment as well, it's going to create specific things in your folder for this specific project we're working on. Is basically going to give us some details about the environment we're connected to, those types of things. So as we get to be building other things like Power Automate flows, plugins, model-driven apps, it's going to need that information. Part of this process as well will be to run Python scripts. So this is something that's kind of integral. When you're installing the Dataverse connector, it will potentially install some of these Python tools as well. Again, it's asking me as we go through this, all the different things. It's going to use the Dataverse command line interface as well, which is part of the Dataverse tools. And you're going to see it go through quite a few steps here as it connects all of these pieces together. But this is the brilliancy of these particular skills. It will actually do a lot of this heavy lifting for us. So we see after a few minutes, it's going to want to create the new environment .env file, which again, you can see it holds the URL, the tenant ID, the MCP client ID, which it enabled for us. So we don't have to go into the PPAC to enable that, and a lot of information. Notice it does not yet have the solution name or the publisher prefix. That's something we're going to do next. Okay, sometimes this happens where it's going to need to connect to the environment. It's going to need to create a device code for you. So we're just going to grab this and copy that into our clipboard. And then we're going to go to Microsoft.com device login. So I'm just going to grab that link. We paste it in our code. We go next. Now we may have to sign in here. I've already signed in. Yeah, let's sign in. And basically it's asking us if we want to sign into the Dataverse command line interface. So we can now close this window, and it's basically trying to get our refresh Python token going here. And we'll go through and configure a series of MCP servers. Specifically, I believe it is going to be setting up the Microsoft Learn MCP server as well as the Dataverse MCP server. Now, while you're watching this video, you notice I was getting a bit of the auto update failed. We don't need to worry about that. We have Claude running another place, so that's why we're getting some of those messages. We're not going to worry about those for now. So we see how our workspace has been created. We have a few other things. We do need to actually go through and restart our session here. And we may be prompted to approve our new MCP server. And then after that, we can begin to do some actual work with Dataverse. So let's actually, before we do this, what we'll do is we'll just quickly grab that. And then what we're going to do is type Claude -- continue. And it's asking me about the new MCP server. And now what I want to do is let's just see if the MCP server is working. So I'm just going to say list the Dataverse tables in an environment. So we see here that we have no custom tables yet, has some common tables like account and contact, that there are 800 system tables. Again, this is a Dataverse environment. That's how it is out of the box. It's actually jumping ahead saying about the building the expense app that we're not quite there yet. So we want to do is create a solution and publisher and then build out our data model. So here I'm going to say, basically here I'm going to say create a new solution and a publisher with a prefix exp. So again, things that we would normally do in the Maker portal, we're now doing this within the context of Visual Studio Code. Now again, have we saved any time yet? Probably not. But again, we're just kind of showing the power of these tools and be able to stay within the single context. And we see here that it is loading the Dataverse solution skill, so it knows what to do here. And it's going to go through that whole process. And here it's asking me if I want to update the environment. So yeah, I'm going to proceed with the pack. It's again using the pack commands. So we see here it did create the publisher, the expense app publisher with an exp as our prefix. And again, we have our solution. It is unmanaged and it's in the environment. So all of these things that we would normally use the Maker portals for, we're doing this completely from the command line. We're getting our agents to do it. And this way we can make things a little bit more consistent, build some scripts around this. And again, we're staying within one context, and we're using natural language, so we don't have to memorize the pack commands, nor do we have to remember where to go click and find these things. So we have all this set up. Again, it seems to be very keen to create our whole expense system here, but we've not given a prompt yet. But here what I'm going to do is this is where we are going to finally use these tools to save time. So normally, once we have our environment set up, once we have our solution and our publisher set up, then we would start going into the Maker portal and begin to create those tables and those columns. Now, there are some other tools there, part of the plan designer, some of the Dataverse designers that can begin to do this, but here we're going to strictly do this from a prompt. So here's our prompt. I want to build a Dataverse data model for an expense app. The table should include expense header, expense lines. The expense header should have an auto number, date, description, total amount, as well as a lookup to the system table contact. It should also have status reasons of open, submitted, approved, paid, closed. The expense line should have a date, an amount, description, and a file field for the receipt. So basically, this is stuff that we would probably have as part of our spec. And then we would begin to type this in the old way in the Maker portal, which would take quite a while. Now we're getting our agent to basically use these skills and build it probably at a much faster rate than we would if we were pointing and clicking and navigating and doing all of these things. So after a few minutes, well, quite a few minutes, it's gone through, created those tables. It did reiterate on a few things. For example, in my example, it created decimal fields when it went a currency field. It recognized that issue and went back. So these are the types of things that we usually want to specify in our prompt so the agent doesn't have to rework these things later. But we go through, we do have our expense header and our expense line items. I'm just going to increase the size of the screen. So we see those and giving you some notes here about the auto number, about the total amount, some other things about the expense line. It talks about the relationship here. We should have a lookup into the contact, and we don't in the expense header. That's interesting. We did, oh yeah, we do, sorry. Here's the contact ID, the lookup to the contact. We have the relationship. It's published as part of the solution. It's given some recommended next steps. So the Dataverse skills can do things like creating a roll-up field. Of course, we probably would want to do this in the plugin, and we'll do that a little bit later, again, using a Claude agent. Could add forms and views and build the basics of a model-driven app. We're going to hold off on this because as part of the Power Platform skills, there are skills coming there to build model-driven apps, probably more robust. So it's asking me if it wants to do this. Actually, what I want to do at this point is I want to add some sample data because we've created the table structure, but I want to create some sample data here, which again is a pretty powerful thing. Probably most of you, when you're creating sample data for dev, you've added the characters for The Simpsons, Chuck Norris, and a bunch of other things like that in order to have some data to work with. Cool thing about these agents, they can create some sample data for us. So let's do that. So it is using the Dataverse DV data skill. Again, these are the set of the skills. It is going to go through and load some of that sample data again. This is something that these agents are good for, that repetitive, boring, tedious stuff that we all do as developers. All right, so after a few minutes, it did create some sample data here with some different things, also the lines and the contacts. So we've gone through that. So where can we go from here? So basically we have our tooling set up, we have our connection to Dataverse. So from here we can go on and continue to build a model-driven app. We can use the skills to create a Canvas app. We can create a Power Pages site. We can create Power Automate flows. We can create plugins. We can create generative pages. We can do client-side scripting. And again, we can begin to save time and we can be 10 times more productive because we're getting the agent to do a lot of the hard lifting, the hard coding, and it's amazing of all the different things it can do. Now, that being said, though, you still need to understand the overstructure of how Dataverse works, how these apps all work, in order to build this out effectively and to be a good solution architect. At the end of the day, this is a tool. Now, some of this stuff earlier on, could I have gone through this and created it manually, like the solution and the environment using the maker tools? Absolutely. But now having everything in one spot, we can begin to build a series of agents to do a lot of this work for us so we can focus on the creative stuff. And here we see in the maker portal, we do have our expense and our expense line created. We can just take a look at this and we can see sample data was created. So we can actually take a look at all of these particular columns. And we see here we have the sample data. You can see here that it did create a series of files that are now stored in our folder. So we have, of course, a Claude with different settings. We have our different plugins installed, the different scripts that Python created to work on building our app. We have here on our solutions, it's broke down to our entities into our solution file. And we have a few other files here like our environment file and that kind of thing. So basically the whole process has set up this project so we can continue on further and begin to create other assets as part of our Power Platform solution. Now, again, we're going to want to store this in source control, and that is the topic of a future video, to be able to store that and track all of those changes. So again, as a maker, this is probably a little bit overwhelming, but once you start using these tools, you begin to see that how quickly you can save a lot of time and kind of use these pro code methods to build pretty powerful Power Platform solutions. Hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the next one.